Good. So I will be moderating this panel, which is on open source risks. And the subtitle, as you can see in the agenda, is looking beyond zero trust to confront the hidden risks that come in the software development pipeline. We've got a great panel here. I'll just do quick names and titles, and I'll let you all fill in as appropriate your role and how it fits into this conversation. Immediate to my left, we have Mark Cantor, who is the Chief Information Security Officer for the Government Accountability Office, so is tasked with really working to help agencies across government sort of understand what's going on, how they can do it better, maybe where they're not doing it so well. So it brings a really good whole-of-government perspective to this. Next to him is Zach Tudor, who is the Associate Lab Director at Idaho National Laboratory. And on the far end is Sasha Zeller, who is with Reversing Labs as the Chief Trust Officer. And gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. So I think we wanted to start with the idea of software factories, which have grown increasingly popular in certain corners of government. And how do you think about hardening every stage of that code to deploy process, given the number of open source components that are being brought into that, and the very sort of open source ethos that usually drives most of the factories? And Mark, maybe we'll give you a first shot at that.
Wonderful, and pleasure to be here speaking with everyone on this topic, because it's such a challenging topic that, I think a lot of us have seen what has been happening in the past couple weeks in the industry, especially with the open source coding out there. This is a real challenge across the board. I think when we start looking at how are we doing code inspection, and it really begins at the very beginning stages of what, even at not bringing the software in, but what software is approved, and how are we continuously updating the approved software and the lists that we do have in our environment, so that we can build secure coding all the way down the line. But it really gets into much further of a depth of how are we code inspecting, how are we looking at it through the pipeline in these various stages, because we often think about the software development lifecycle as, okay, developers, but we really need to start looking at it all the way at the beginning of who those originators are, not just the developers, all the way through to make sure that the integrity and the chain of custody remains constant throughout the environment. So.
Very good. And I promise we're not just going to go down the line on each question, but to get us started, we'll go down the line. So, Zach?
Hi, yeah, I'm Zach Tudor. I'm the Associate Lab Director at Idaho National Laboratory. Those of you that know National Labs know that we do a lot of everything in different ways. I'm kind of an adjunct to some of the different sponsors that we do. So the first thing I will say is that you have to understand what can go wrong. So I have the queen, the mother of cyber-informed engineering, staring straight in front of me. So I will mention the fact that thinking about cyber vulnerabilities early in any of the processes. Oh, look, we even have a copy of the cyber-informed engineering strategy from the Department of Energy. I like visual aids coming from everywhere. And I think one of the things that I always talk about, and I've been on several panels this week, and I think one of the things is intentionality. Right? You're not going to get secure functional software by accident. And so you have to know your own software process in your organizations and be able to understand what each phase is and why it's there, what can go wrong, that's cyber-informed engineering, and how it will affect the end product. You also have to make sure that even at the requirements, right, we understand these things. So developing those software factories is still an ecosystem. Don't let the software developers think they know everything. Those of you that are software developers out there, I'm sorry to let you know that you don't know everything. But neither do the people with the requirements. It takes that village to make code. Right? So go from there.
Very good. And Sasha?
Yeah, thank you very much. You said software factories, and if you think about, and the panel is about zero trust. If you think about how we would apply that to software factories, I don't think the question is really whether zero trust is effective in this context. I think it's more about our definition of verification is comprehensive enough for what software means. So if you look at every framework out there and standard, they generally are all premised on being able to identify good versus bad, or anomalous. But that is usually in the context of network. How do you know whether a software composition or the components within what you're building, whether they're good or bad? So I think our understanding, the level of transparency that we need and the ability to analyze the components, the Lego pieces that we're constructing software with, right? Less and less it's first-party code and, developed by people directly. In fact, developed by people less and less. More and more it's constructed, right? And so we're depending on pre-vetted or kind of pre-blessed components increasingly. How do we know if those are good? So I think the biggest challenge is not even how do you apply your historic, SAS, DAST, and whatever other tools, SCA, and many of those have their own limitations, but a lot of times the compromise that we see ends up happening post all of those tools doing their job, right? It's the compromise of the CI/CD pipeline itself. It's tampering with it. It's things that would not be classically identified as vulnerabilities. What if what was injected is malware? There's no CVE for that. So I think those are some of the bigger challenges around software factories.
I also want to jump in for a question, if I may. So one of the other things that we're seeing more time and effort being spent on, once again at the national labs as well, is high assurance systems. So trying to develop formal methods that are actually usable at the end user locations, rather than just like this esoteric thing. So if we have a program for high assurance information systems, being able to make judgments about software, its trustworthiness, in various stage. Composability is still a thing, right? You can have 5 secure components, and those people will fight me on it. Just because you have secure components, putting them all together does not ensure a secure system. You can't prove that it is. But I will prove to you that having 5 insecure components linked together is probably a bad thing. And so working towards those types of methodologies in the future is going to be something that we're going to see coming.
Right. And since, please.
Yep. I just want, as you were speaking about, the chain, I really want to call attention to, what, if you're all familiar with what's going on the GitHub side right now, how many people are actually familiar with all the injection that is actually happening just because people have either inadvertently typed in their credentials to the comments and it's exposing GitHub? Something as benign and simple as that, people forget, or when they do those type of things, forget to change them right away. And that's creating a lot of this exposure that we're seeing throughout the environment right now. So again, as we're talking about understanding, these might be issues that are just lying in wait until they get to production or become more static of code base or that production code base that they can then get into that exfiltration style or whatever they try to do on that. But
I think to your point, Mark, I think you're highlighting something very important. Is I think we tend to let vulnerabilities be sort of the majority of the conversation we have in this space. But again, whether software that you're relying on has been tampered with, contains secrets. To your point, was originally compiled not using best practices at hardening time. Violates licenses. There's all sorts of risks that can be as bad, or in many cases even worse than a vulnerability in the classic sense.
Yeah. So, and I want to stay on those threads, but come back to a very specific question. And Zach, you talked about the systems that the labs are putting in place to try and stay on top of this. In the spirit of open source and sharing, are there tools or lessons learned there that they're available to other organizations that might want to adapt them to their use?
Yeah, well, one of the major tools that we have been developing first for CISA and now inside the DoD is a framework called Malcolm. And once again, it's an open source tool. However, it's open source in the fact that you may take it and modify it as you need to, but the software itself has been developed by INL, so vetted personnel. However, once again, there are still software dependencies in there. So you can't just say, oh yeah, we know that this software is secure. We feel it's lower risk in some areas, and it does give you that framework. But the kind of the other part is some of the things that we do as part of our framework. We do use fuzzing, machine learning type algorithms that can do validation. And so I'll say it first because I like to start off every panel with 5 or 6 buzzwords. So when
We forgot to issue the bingo
when Rosie
cards, I'm
comes in, we
sorry,
can
so-
get high up on the list. But now that we've had these different types of methodologies that have been kind of very manual and operator intensive, intelligent fuzzing, intelligent analysis tools. Once again, and they are tools. They're not going to answer all the questions. And Claude, please look at my code and tell me if it's secure. And because it wants to please you, it'll say, of course it's secure, and I'll show you why. And it'll be wrong. But help me use and understand these tools. And I did mention, yes. So we're also working on how to actually incorporate high assurance in some of these. And we'll be working on that composability problem probably forever. But that's something else that we want to do as well.
Very good. And Sasha, a moment ago, you mentioned the, just the, how much of software development is relying on others' code, and that's obviously a key part of this conversation. Several career chapters ago, I was very active in an open source community, and at that point, there's still that sort of theory that just because it's open and there are lots of eyes on it, therefore it's probably more secure than proprietary code, and which is true to a certain point, but certainly not sufficient to the overall risk. I mean, given just the vast number of open source dependencies in software, what are the lessons learned about how to realistically verify that security? I mean, at first there's just how do you start to assess it, and then how do you fix things, secure it, and maintain those records. But given those dependencies, it's for those that aren't living it every day, it seems like an almost impossible scope.
Yeah, it's certainly large, and I think no one would argue it's not multiplying exponentially. I don't say that hyperbolically. I really think it's multiplying exponentially. At the same time, I think our capabilities are generally evolving linearly. That is not a good combination.
Right.
Also, if you think about where open source, and they say the world runs on open source, absolutely very true. But where does most open source end up? It ends up in the commercial software that we all actually run, and that runs all of our companies. And for that, all you get from the vendor is a binary. You get zoom.exe, and good luck with what you're going to do with that. It usually comes with nothing else. Maybe the vendor supplies an SBOM with it. Usually it doesn't. You have no way, unless you have some pretty specialized technology, of verifying whether what they say is in there is really in there. So I think that I would say we need to ensure we don't over-fixate on open source only as a component. It is a component in the software that we rely on that runs our companies every day, right? Our treasury management systems, our ERM systems, like ERP systems, no one's built their own SAP or Salesforce. They run theirs. No one's built their own Zoom. They use theirs. No one's built their own treasury management system. They use the commercial ones for good reasons, right? Expandability, supportability, patching, whatever. Great. That's full of open source. So it's how do you know what went into that? And in an era where, we want tremendous transparency, I think there are some incredible initiatives pushing for that. We also live in an era of intellectual property protections. How do you operate in those two environments that are at odds with each other?
Yeah.
Let me extend that, because thinking about not just the commercial space, but your personal space, your house, how many people have smart homes? That's all got the supply chain in there now. Pretty much any car that's built after really 2003 is all open source. Right? How many people know how to update their car, or even if their car is updatable? I mean, but if you go in and look at the about side of those infotainment centers, you'll see all the open source that has been in the car, and guarantee that there's a lot of issues related to that environment. So these are just constant things that we need to think about as far as the supply chain is. How are we getting updates? How are we securing ourselves, let alone from the corporate side? I mean, the corporate side also, but it's in our daily lives.
But there is something here that I think is uniquely powerful to the folks in this room. I think we said we had a lot of folks from government, right? Government is also a huge purchaser, right? They are a giant consumer of technology and software, giant, as are the largest corporations on the planet. So, Obviously, we all love our partners at CISA and all the other agencies that put out some wonderful guidance, secure by design, secure by demand, all this other stuff. Those are all amazing. But no vendor, and I work for a private equity firm, right? I have 26 companies, all in cyber, and not one of them will spend an extra dollar of G&A cost for something that the customer is not asking for or that they cannot pass off the cost of to the customer.
Yeah, but I'll say that that has been changing over time because there are going to be, and there have been, areas where accountability has gone back to those who won't put
But
security applications in.
But that's my point,
yeah,
is there's huge buying power here, and it's the buyer side that will drive the change, right? So until the buyers start demanding better in this space, right? More transparency, better components, higher integrity and verification, greater attestations, that's what we need. We need the buyer side. The government obviously is a huge buyer, as well as the largest corporations. They need to start communicating that, hey, we will not renew next time because of these sorts of things, or unless you can attest, unless you can prove. And I think that's your point.
Yeah, but part of the issue is the government is becoming a smaller and smaller part of the driving the requirements for those types of things. And but the other side is, so I'm the national security guy, right? Your kids won't eat their vegetables, even though they need them, so you make them. We need to make sure that we drive these requirements down before the customers understand the need, because people who are in our infrastructure, adversaries are with us all the time, and waiting for us to understand that and then ask for security will be 20 years too late. So we need to make sure that at every level, at every practitioner out here, right, you can't wait for the customer. And so we have to find ways to make security less of a cost and more of a procedure that we follow. So you think about safety because you have to. You think about features because you sell them. Security, we're not going to pay extra for that. Well, you may pay, and actually it's down the line after you've sold that company, and there's a bad update, and people get sued for $100 million. That's no longer going to be your problem. And depending on who it is that compromised that software, it's going to be all the rest of us that pay. We have to make sure that we make those changes now.
Mark, is there any work that GAO's done sort of specific to that provenance and verification that we should be calling out for this group?
So yes, we do have ongoing reports across GAO that really focuses in on just the government in general. How are we reporting these type of concerns, issues, right? There was a central body that within CISA that was or is compiling a lot of that information, then working with GSA to have a centralized registry of a lot of these components as you were talking about. I did want to jump back to thinking about the supply chain aspect about this, is just because the driver. I mean, we were talking about accountability. Perfect question for this. As we, the companies, government, GAO, as we're reporting a lot of these things, the companies need to take notice on how the security of their products are being utilized. I will share the first supply chain disclosure that I wrote was in 2001. So if how many people in this room were probably really proficient with computers all the way back then. It actually gave, yes, handful. But it actually gave a shell back to a foreign adversary, is what had happened on that one. But again, the supply chain and being able to not only really construct it back to the companies so they can fix their products or upgrade or have that consistency that we need to expect from this. But it's the overall framework of responsible reporting, things that need to happen just organically that really needs to take shape.
And just a little bit of a devil's advocate question. We're talking about like the importance of this, and it's obviously essential, but every bit of verification, every bit of trying to document this adds one layer of review and friction. How do you strike the balance between sort of doing this verification and ensuring the security without grinding the development process to a halt?
Yeah. And there is the issue. So where is the, and so once again, I am the proponent of AI as a tool and not the solution for everything. So we need to make the system, not frictionless, with less friction in that system, as you mentioned. Some of the tools that have been developed. So, people are just now getting better at developing and understanding what a good SBOM is. Here's a bad joke coming, right? And so we talk about the whole system environment. Alan Friedman said that, what about H-bombs? Someone talked about a digital bomb. I like to put them all together, like to federate them. And so we can all drop F-bombs wherever we go. And so, but it's those things. So the tools are there, and once again, like I'm not as proficient with my AI assistants as I could be, because I haven't spent the time learning to use the tool as well as others might. We need to take those tools. The carpenter that didn't go and use a circular saw or a jigsaw and was making things by hand got put out of business by the people that use the tools, right? So we need to do that, and hopefully that will cut down on some of that friction. And then understanding how all these things, go together, not necessarily composable, but the system engineering kind of view.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Extend that a little bit more. One of the things that I think really kind of is keying in on this is, are we looking really at a traditional software development lifecycle, or are we ensuring, across the board, you have the business partners, the system owners, and all of those standards that are built in, but where are the ISOs? Where are the technical people that are really making it happen? Are they built through the entire software development process along the way, so that we can be, I'm not a proponent of one methodology or another, but we need to be able to shift agile so that we can develop software in a timely manner, because the last thing a venture capital company would want is, okay, well, now we need to hold it up for security.
Yeah, I'll just say, there is an interesting, to build on your point, I think this is, obviously buzzword, here comes a buzzword, so we should have a drinking game for this, right? But I think this is actually an excellent opportunity for AI. An excellent opportunity, right? If you think about the traditional approach of many eyes, right, kind of being the paradox that gave open source a lot of security, is we're all looking at it, everyone's looking at it. At high velocity, the inability for enough humans to look at it creates a real problem. I think this is an area where AI could deliver a lot of value. Will it get some things wrong? Sure. Yeah. And the usual arguments still apply.
So will people.
Yeah, that's my point, is the usual arguments still apply, but I'd rather have massive scale and sometimes getting it wrong than a lot smaller scale and then still sometimes getting it wrong. So I think this is an excellent opportunity, and it will only get better to apply AI to kind of the many eyes.
You can use multiple engines and have confidence factors from each, and then say, okay, yeah. So
and they can act as verifiers on each other. There's some ways to kind of de-risk that. But again, it's all better than nothing, and it's all better than finite human capacity.
Right.
Yeah.
So clearly, we would need a whole nother panel to dig into this and do it half the just. Anyone who wants to stay through lunch, we can. But I want to give each of you just a moment for like a quick final thought. If for the conversations that we have after this panel with people in the hallways over lunch, where do you think the focus should be? What is your foot stomp for the group?
So I, come from GAO. I'd always like to say the accountability side, but I think the big key is as we look at the entire space is how quickly and how agile we need to be able to shift into leveraging the tools. Right, AI is right around the corner. If you haven't already been playing with it, as I know I have, and it's fascinating how quickly you can bring products to the market, and then start looking at other things. I think we need to really consider how those processes, or where do we need to modernize our processes to really build software, really build that supply chain management, ensure that the controls are effective throughout our environment, leveraging the AI, because after all, we're going to build timeliness, efficiency, and at the end of the day, an overall more secure posture.
Very good. Zach, your thoughts?
So once again, I got my notes here, and of course, so we're talking beyond zero trust here, right? And so I think one of the ideas is, not to, place all of your trust in a tool or any methodology or the thing that's happening today, but come up with an intentional system that is justifiable and verifiable. I know why we made this software. I know how we made it, and go forward, rather than, I'm not sure, but it works really well, right? And so, use those systems. Think of things, when the new tools come out, use zero trust because it's valuable. actually use multi-factors for multi-factor authentication, et cetera, et cetera. But remember, there are more types of risks and there are more ways to fight them.
Very good. And Sasha, we'll give you the last word.
Sure. Yeah, I think, I spent about 20 years in energy prior to moving into the space I'm in now. And there we had this intense focus on quality assurance and sample quality and things like that. I think, this is an area where we could maybe redefine how we think about this problem being as a little bit less of cyber defense and a little bit more as a quality assurance discipline. I'd say that's one thing. The second thing, or last thing I would say is, again, just don't forget where the ultimate securing of open source leads to, which is those components end up being in the things that run your entity every day, in the commercial software that you rely on every single day to make sure your entity, company, corporation, government agency, whatever is running. And we need far more capability to kind of screen what we're buying.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I will thank you all in just a moment, but for the audience here, clearly there's more to discuss. I would encourage you to track these gentlemen and the other speakers down, during the lunch break. Come back for the tabletop exercises, which will be a chance to do more of this dialogue, because clearly an important subject that needs an ongoing conversation. But Mark, Zach, Sasha, thank you so much for being part of this.
Thank you.